we've now talked about your introduction for your impromptu speech. And in that introduction, you're basically giving your audience a roadmap, an orientation. So now I kind of want to shift and talk a little bit about transitions and then conclusions. So after that introduction, you've given your audience this roadmap saying basically, here's the nature of our journey over the next couple of minutes. Transitions are going to help the audience follow along, identify, markers, where they are in the speech. And this is good in a short speech, but it's tremendously important in much longer speeches, right? 45-minute speech, you say you're going to talk about 5 things. Reminding people where you are kind of helps them place what you're talking about, but also gives them a sense of how close you are to the end. So it's doing a lot for you in terms of clarity, but also in terms of helping the audience dial in their expectations. How much longer are you going to be speaking for? So what are the functions of a transition? Remember, for the introduction, we're not thinking necessarily in terms of raw content, but what does that introduction need to deliver on? So too with a transition. What does it need to do for that audience? Well, transitions should be able to demonstrate the distinctness of each point, basically saying I'm done with that point and I'm not going to be talking about this point. And so as part of that, demonstrating the distinctness of each point, and then also helping the audience know where you are. So if you say you're going to talk about 2 points, you finish talking about one, we know you're about to talk about the next one. If you're talking about 10 points, I don't know why you would, but if you're talking about 10 points, you say, I'm done with point 7, now I'm moving on to point 8. That kind of helps me know where we are in that roadmap that you gave me in the introduction. So there are lots of ways that you can do this. Transitions shouldn't be overly elaborate affairs, but they are just helping the audience understand we're done with that point, we're moving on to the next point. So there's a lot of things you can be doing to sort of help with this understanding. You can use physical movement to help the audience perceive the transition that you're making. So, it doesn't have to be a huge step, but you can actually walk on your transitions. Just some sort of physical or auditory break between the major chunks of your presentation. And this can be dialed up or dialed down based on your physical mobility and unique space considerations. But it's just a way of thinking about how you can use your entire instrument in conveying the information to your audience. So, you could do your introduction here. Sometimes we'll talk about a speaker's triangle. I'm starting here and moving there and there. So maybe, let's say in my impromptu speech, I do the introduction here. And then on the first point, I transition over to here. I talk for a little bit. I'm done talking about that first main point, and I take a step or two over here, talk about this, and then make my way back to the conclusion on that transition point. If I've got a really large audience, maybe then I'm using that as an opportunity to really walk to different parts of the room or different parts of the stage. But transitions are pretty straightforward. They're functional. They should help your audience figure out where you are. So let's talk about conclusions. What are the functions of a conclusion? Well, if the opening was the curtain rising, then the conclusion is that curtain coming down again. So your conclusion should review the main points and restate the thesis, basically remind the audience of that key argumentative information, but it should also provide a sense of closure to the speech itself, right? So we know that you're done. Just like we wanted to make sure that the audience knew that we started, we want them to know that we're done. And without a doubt, your audience in this short impromptu speech, may not need a review of the key points, but you can do this review quickly and easily, just readdressing that roadmap that you gave us in the introduction. But then we get to this last line, and the final line should, quite honestly, sound and feel like a final line of a speech. So it's perfectly acceptable to say thank you at the end of a speech. It's polite even. You were done, raised up, right. That's good. But I don't think you should have to say thank you in order for the audience to know that you're done. You should be able to convey, you should be able to telegraph through pacing and tone that a final line is the last line of your speech. You don't want to get to the end of your speech, finish that last line and have silence, right? Only to say thank you as a way of killing that awful, awkward tension in the room. You don't want to be like, and so these are the reasons why I think MOOCs are perfectly fine to teach performance skills. That's all I have. You don't want the, hey, wake up, dummy's done, right? So you want it to sound like you're building to that last line. Now, this is obviously going to vary based on language, but what does that final line usually sound like in spoken English? Well, it's probably slower with more pauses between the words, more deliberate tone, and probably noticeably drops off there at the end of the sentence. So let me go ahead, and I worked up that sample impromptu. Let me just go ahead and do the conclusion from that, or one version of a conclusion from that. So let's say I walk over on point 1, I'm over here on point 2, so here I am. I'll transition into my conclusion and do my conclusion. So I certainly understand why some would be skeptical, but I do strongly believe that MOOCs can teach performance skills. And they can do this because they can provide efficient instruction, and they can actually produce some good student practice. Now, clearly it's not the same thing. You don't get one-on-one coaching or the immediacy of feedback that you would in a university setting. But you also get the opportunity to reach a much larger audience that just can't happen when you're locked away in a specific classroom. So these two things are different, but just because they're different doesn't mean they can't accomplish the same thing. They, in fact, often can. MOOCs are very good spaces for learning, modeling, and practicing performance skills. So hopefully that last line you can hear sort of slows down, more deliberate, and it drops off at the end. So at the end of that last line, I would hope for applause at the end of that last line. I generally hope for applause after most lines, but especially at the end of the last line, I want people to be able to know that I'm done and start applauding. So what I'd like you to do now is I asked you to prepare a MOOC, I asked you to prepare an impromptu a while back. So what I'd like you to do is just run your conclusion as a way of practicing conclusions and pay special attention to the sound and the feel of that last line. So in the next lecture, what I'm going to go ahead and do is just run an entire impromptu speech trying to highlight all the various elements that are going on. But go ahead and practice that conclusion now.